This is Chapter 11, Part 2, Principles of Interpersonal Conflict. I said this at the beginning of our first video for Chapter 11, and that is that conflict is going to happen within a relationship. It's inevitable. It's a part of the human condition. But not all conflict has to be bad. There are negative elements to conflict, and there are positive elements to conflict. As far as the negative effects go, it causes us to expend energy that could be better spent somewhere else on happier things, more positive things, things that we enjoy doing, but instead we have to spend our energy on conflict, so that can be a negative outcome. And another thing about conflict negatively is if conflict is not handled well through healthy conversation, then it can be detrimental to a relationship. So if conflict is handled poorly, it can be a bad thing. This is why we need to learn the skills that we talk about in this chapter so that we can help handle conflict productively within our own relationships. Some of the positive things that can come about through conflict is that it forces both parties to work together, which can strengthen a relationship, and it keeps things from getting out of hand, keeps hostility from festering. And as pretty much everything we've discussed throughout this course, as everything else, culture and gender do impact the way that conflict is handled. So depending on cultural background, some topics are off limits whenever it comes to culture, some are not. The nature of the conflict might change as far as if you're direct or indirect, if you speak face to face or through some other strategy. And then, of course, an additional form of culture is organizational culture. So this may have nothing to do with international lines. It may have everything to do with just where you work as to how you manage conflict within the workplace. And then between genders, typically speaking, although some research doesn't quite indicate this, but typically speaking, males have a tendency to withdraw from conflict, and females have a tendency to want to pursue conflict. Females are seen as conflict feelers. It gets into the emotion side of things. And males are seen as being more logical when handling conflict and seen as conflict thinkers. So you can see a very distinct difference between at least masculine and feminine tendencies within a conflict. So depending on how we handle conflict, it'll have a result on the outcome. And so we have these different competing styles or conflict styles. The first one is called competing. It's an I win and you lose type mentality. Those people that must win the argument, must win the conflict. This is going to be their strategy. In some cases, this is the only strategy. It's the only one that will work. With interpersonal relationships, though, we try to avoid this competing strategy when we can. Speaking of avoiding is another conflict style where it's a lose-lose scenario, but it's where you just more or less walk away from the conflict, sometimes literally, sometimes figuratively, but you avoid the discussion, you avoid the conflict entirely. The downside is that the conflict does not get resolved this way. Sometimes it's a healthy strategy for a temporary avoidance whenever everyone is angry, and tempers will only get worse if the conversation continues. In those situations, it might be best to walk away and then readdress the conflict at a later time. The accommodating strategy is a I lose and you win. Essentially, here, one party will just give up and say, we'll do it your way. To go back to the earlier example, here, earlier example being in our first lecture video, but you have one person that wants to go to the movies and one wants to stay at home. Accommodating is the one that wants to stay home agrees, let's just go to the movies tonight. It's an accommodating strategy. They didn't get what they wanted, but they made the other one happy. Downside to an accommodating strategy is this can lead to an inequity within the relationship if it's done too many times. Collaborating is where two people might work together to come to a mutually satisfactory solution. So it's a win-win scenario. So to use that example again, perhaps, at least back in my generation, a couple might have agreed to go out and rent a movie from somewhere like Blockbuster or Hastings, pick up a pizza, and then go back home. So then both got some satisfaction and end up with a solution that maybe is equitable for both of them. You could also see that particular instance as a compromising solution. So both got something they wanted, both lost something they wanted. The book doesn't really talk about it this way, but personally I see that oftentimes collaboration and compromise end up going hand in hand. But it just depends on the scenario. While we are trying to manage conflict, understand that it's not a one and done scenario. Conflict is a step-by-step process if you are trying to manage it. So first things first, it is best to manage conflict privately. You don't want to air your dirty laundry in front of other people on social media or in the grocery store. We want to make sure that we have as private a situation as possible for that discussion. You don't want to spring a conflict on somebody else. You want to give them adequate time to prepare as well, mentally, for that type of conversation. Choose a time when both parties are ready. Step 2 is define the conflict. Definition is very important. It's important that we know what we're talking about when we have a conflict. So we need to use specific terms. We need to use good descriptions of whatever it is that we disagree on. So define both the content of it and any relational issues that might be present in that situation. For instance, if you feel that someone is overstepping their bounds within the relationship, that needs to be brought up. Something that doesn't need to be brought up is past grievances. Those are generally not useful or helpful in resolving conflict. They typically only will bring about defensiveness and maybe some aggression. It is always good to empathize within the conflict, to try to feel what the other person feels. This goes both ways. Whereas you do want to try to feel how the other one feels and get a sense of it, avoid mind reading. Ask questions instead to make sure you understand things. Don't make assumptions just because you may know the person well. Step 3 is identify your goals. Your goals and their goals need to be very clear within a conflict negotiation. What do you want to get out of this? Now, if all you want is a good fight, well, that's not what we're talking about here. And I would argue that there's no such thing as a good fight. There are good arguments. There are healthy conflicts. There's not such a thing as a good fight. So if that's what you want, this is not the chapter for you. Identify what your goals are. Make sure that the counterpart's goals are clear as well. Once those goals are clear, start talking about solutions. Brainstorm these ideas. Get all the ideas out there. Talk about them all. And through that give and take process, you'll arrive at a solution. Once you have found that solution, act on it. Step 6 is then evaluate that choice. Did it work the way that we hoped that it would? If it did, continue using it. If it did not, go back to step 4. Identify and evaluate your choices again. You'll still have the previous solutions. You may go back to that list, or you may try to brainstorm new ones altogether. There are multiple perspectives for how you can look at this whole process. That's what the Thinking Hats is about. And if you want to look at that, you will find it on page 316 of your text. And then finally, step 7, you want to wrap up the negotiation. It's done, it's behind us. And then learn from this conflict for future encounters with this individual and future conflicts that you have with them and with other people.